hard to sit there and talk to a camera.
Really?
You try doing it.
I can't.
You try sitting down and talking to a camera. It's really hard to do. Okay. It is. It's really hard.
You gotta pretend it's a person.
No, that's even harder because then it feels so stupid. It's easier doing it when you're on your own.
Okay. Well, I'll leave.
You go put the kettle on. Cup of tea and donut? Did you get donuts?
No dog nuts.
No dog's nuts.
No dog nuts. But we got Paddingtons.
We got Paddingtons instead.
Okay.
Jam ones.
Jam.
Hello and welcome to my workshop. My name is Paul. I'm a luthier and bow maker based in Tasmania, Australia. In this series I will share some of the projects I work on each week, giving you a glimpse over my shoulder as I work, as though you were looking through the window into my workshop.
Hello and welcome back to the workshop. Today we'll be looking at bow rehairing. I'll take you through the process that I follow. This will be a multiple video series, possibly 3 to 4 parts, and I'll try and keep each video down to 10 to 15 minutes. So the steps we'll cover will be removing the hair from the bow, cleaning and inspecting the moving parts and I guess all parts for damage, wear, and for what needs replacing, cutting new wedges, and sorting out and fitting the new hair. I would encourage, where possible, to take your bow to a professional bow maker or at least a reputable shop to get your rehairs done. It is a specialist job, and one best, not carried out by a backyarder. If it's your own bow that you're doing, you want to learn how to rehair bows, go ahead, follow along, and have a go. You'll hopefully learn something from it. But do be aware, if you do have a bow of high quality, it's best to get a professional to do it. There are mistakes that can be made which will damage the bow and may reduce the bow's value. Some of the mistakes that can be made can be quite catastrophic. So from here we'll jump straight into removing the hair from this bow. Oh, by the way, this bow that we'll be working on today is a W.E. Hill & Sons tortoiseshell silver mounted. It's a fleur-de-lis model, so the frog has a pattern of a fleur-de-lis in silver in the frog. It's quite dirty. It's been well played, well used. It was made by the second William Retford, or the son of the first William Retford. Would be circa 1920 to 1930, so it's sort of 90 to 100 years old. And was in the prime of the best hill bow makers. So it's a really nice bow, silver mounted, silver tip, and will be nice to see it come together and clean up. Yep, we'll get straight into removing the hair. So just before we pull the hair out of the bow, I'll run you through a few of the tools that I'll be using. One of them is a scalpel. Use 10A blades on a surgical scalpel. A small chisel. This one's got a 3mm wide blade on it. A pair of needle nose pliers can come in handy. I use a round what's called a mouse tail file, a good quality sharp knife for cutting your wedges, pencil, sometimes a ruler, and a small 4mm screwdriver or flathead screwdriver or similar implement to use to push your wedges or your plugs in when you're changing it.
You can also make up a nice hardwood implement of the similar sort of shape, and just knock any sharp edges off. If you do use a screwdriver, knock your sharp edges off on a piece of fine wet and dry, prevent damage, and use them with care. Apart from that, you'll need a hank of hair, some timber for your bow wedges. I use old maple from old cello bridges, and a piece of I prefer a softwood for the spreading wedge. So first up, we'll remove the adjuster screw from the back end of the frog, unwind it totally. The frog then lifts away, and that shows the mechanism that the frog runs on. Here's a brass eyelet that the adjuster screw runs into. That runs up and down in the mortise, which is what tightens and loosens your bow. So I just use a small vise with leather on the jaws, or soft. You want not something to protect the bow. You don't need to clamp it up very tightly. You can also use a block of timber with a V cut, sort of similar to the finger shape there, and line the jaws with again with leather, just to support the head. So you'll notice with this wedge there's a gap either side, here and here. Personally, I don't like a gap there. That tends to focus all the pressure from the hair onto one area of the back plate in the head. This one is not a very extreme example. You do see some examples where they're very extreme in that, and it pushes the hair to a very fine point. The grain runs through the head long ways like this, so all the back end of the head here is end grain, and if you're putting all the pressure from the hair that holds the hair into one small area of end grain, especially on a bow like this, which will have a single silver pin driven down through the back to hold the silver tip on, that then is putting all that pressure on one small area of weakened end grain, and that's where you see the back ends of bows split out, and then there's quite costly repairs to fix those. So often what I'll do is use the tip of the scalpel just to run down the sides of the wedge. Often that's enough to get it out. You don't want to leave a sideways off the wedge. You're likely to split the sides out on the frog. This one comes out quite easily. And if we have a look at this little wedge, it's got a little V cut in it to let the hair out. There's no real shaping to prevent. It's quite sharp edges, and that's going to push. You're going to have uneven length of hair coming out from here and here. So, that's going to push some hairs farther into the bow, others not so far in. It is angled on the front here. There is a slight angle, and that's to help prevent the wedge come out. It's quite a shallow little wedge. I've just lost it, and I'll try and use that, and I'll find it and use it as a comparison. After that, the hair just pops out of the top. Sometimes they're a little more difficult to come out than that, and that shows you the old wedge, the old knot. That's at least quite reasonably tied. It's been tied and dipped in either some sort of wax, glue, or burned rosin, and it's at least quite a nice knot on that, even if the wedge wasn't brilliant. Now to remove the metal ferrule on the end of the frog, there is a spreading wedge in here. You can see this one protrudes out from the end slightly. We want to make sure that wedge isn't any larger than the size of the ferrule hole. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull the ferrule out over the top, over the front of that. Now if this doesn't come off easily, then we'll look at cutting that wedge out before we pull the ferrule over, because we don't want to split or break the ferrule. So if it pops off easily like this, then I'll just pop it in the soft jaws of the vise, grip it, and a few little gentle pulls, again, you don't want to put too much pressure holding with the vise. It's just enough to hold it, and that should just pull out easily. If it doesn't come out easily like that, you do need to get in and cut this little spreading wedge out before you remove the hair. Otherwise you'll do some damage to the ferrule. And then that hair should just pull through. That comes out. This is a good little ferrule wedge. It's small, doesn't go too deeply in. You do see some, especially when they're aggressively cut on the V like this, where the V angle protrudes really deeply into this area. And if you have a look at the tongue on the front of the pearl slide here, there's actually not a lot of room. Once your ferrule is on, there's not a lot of room. If this goes in too deeply, you don't leave any room for the hair to actually go between this slide and the spreading wedge. So your spreading wedges can't go in too deep. They need to be designed so as they hold the hair, they just spread the hair. They don't actually hold the hair in, they're just spreading it. The hair shouldn't pull out. So we'll go into a bit more of that later. Then your slide just slides out. It should come out just with thumb pressure. A few things you can do if you're struggling to get it out. You can a little bit of water or wet your thumb on some powdered rosin. It can give your thumb a little more grip to slide it out. Under no circumstances do you use any blade or chisel at the back. You know, don't get your chisel in at the back and try and wedge it in there and push it out that way. You've got to be careful not to split the sides out. So there are a few other tips and tricks you can do. You can get a small block of wood, often I'll use an old wedge, and a small dab of super glue on the bottom, and then you glue it on the top of the pearl only. You need to make sure that the glue doesn't go out the sides. It only needs a really small amount, and the block actually needs to be smaller than this one, so that it just glues on there, and then you can use that as an extra leverage to push. Then because of the nature of the pearl and the way super glue reacts to the pearl, the block will just snap off, leave a small residue of super glue, which will then polish off the top of the pearl without doing it any damage. So then the hair. So the hair is held in using another small wedge. And again, a similar process, just sliding the scalpel in down the sides is generally enough just to pop that out. And just pull him out. Again, quite a nice knot on this. So whoever's done it uses some nice knots. I'm not a big fan of this skinny little wedge. That's not much that's stopping that wedge from popping out. There really isn't. So it's quite a bit of luck there really that held that in. There is a very, very slight angle again to the front here, which is probably all that held it in. And it was fairly loose fitting in there as well. If you drop that in there, it just sort of falls in. You don't want your wedges to just fall in like that. Like that's really not much chock, so I don't really think much of that wedge. So once I've made my wedges, I'll use those ones to compare against. So that's the hair out of the bow. So now we will look at the moving parts, see how, make sure that they're running. There's not too much sideways movement on the frog when it's seated. It's winding right back, and forward again smoothly. There's no damage on the inside of the frog to the wings. The eyelet has got no movement in it. Need to check that the eyelet there has got no sideways movement in it. I'll look at how much play. Look at how much play is in the eyelet. Thanks, sure. An inspection of the tip, just to make sure that focus. We'll inspect the tip, make sure that it's fitting correctly. There's no splits in the bone or silver or whatever the tip is made of, often their bone. Make sure there's no splits across the smaller areas. There's no cracks in the back of the head. The other area you want to look for wear is in the hole that the adjuster screw runs in, at both at the front here where it's supported, and at the back, and make sure there's not too much play in those areas. So there we have the hair removed from the bow. The parts individually set out on the bench. I will now proceed to clean those mainly using the Percal metal polish that you see in the back there. Don't use any spirit-based cleaners, as bows are often finished with a light spirit varnish. Spirit varnishes could be used as a grain filler. The best bows are generally polished timber. The timber is straight up polished. There's no heavy varnish applied, but depending on the varnish that has been used or as a finish or on your stick, you don't want to use a spirit-based, methylated spirits or something like that, or rubbing alcoholic based cleaners. Nothing too aggressive. You can use metal polishes are often good. A good one you can use is Brasso, but again you need to be careful that you don't let the Brasso dry on the stick. You need to clean it off beforehand. Yeah, my preference is the Percal, but whether or not you can get that is yeah. Just don't use anything too aggressive. Be careful, take it slowly. I'll come back to you once all the parts are cleaned up and ready to go, as that whole process is quite laborious, and there's really no point in showing me doing a whole heap of little cleaning jobs.